There are 7 names in Genesis that almost no one stops to ask about, not because they are unimportant, because they are placed in the one genealogy most people read quickly and move past. The line of Cain, 7 generations, 8 verses, and then silence. The Western canon closes that door and does not open it again. But the Ethiopian Bible kept something about each of those 7 names that Genesis never explained. Specific details, specific meanings, specific reasons why these people were not simply the corrupt ones who disappeared into the flood. Tonight, gentle heart, we are going through all 7, one by one, slowly, beginning with a question that the Book of Jubilees answers in a way no other tradition thought to preserve. Why does the name Enoch appear in both bloodlines? In the line of Cain and in the line of Seth, the same name, different fathers, different worlds, and the Ethiopian tradition has a specific answer for that. An answer that changes what the name means in both places. That is where we are going tonight. Into the 7 names, into what was kept when almost every other tradition let these people remain strangers. What stays with me tonight is not the big story. It is the small detail that sits inside it. The one most people move past too quickly. I am Pastor Michael, and I have been sitting with Genesis chapter 4 for longer than I expected to. Not the part most people read. The part after the exile from Eden, after the offering, after Abel, the part where Cain walks away and builds something. Most of us were taught that Cain's line is a warning, a record of what happens when a bloodline moves further and further from what it was given at the beginning. And there is truth in that reading, but it is not the complete reading, because the Book of Jubilees, which the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has carried in its canon for 15 centuries, does not read Cain's line as simply the dark side of the human story. It reads it as a record, a specific, carefully preserved record of what a civilization builds when it is cut off from its source, what it invents, what it names, what it passes forward, what it destroys, and what somehow survives it. That is a different question than the one most people bring to this genealogy. And tonight, I want to sit with that question the way I first felt it when I read the Ge'ez text slowly. And one name stopped me completely. Not Cain, not Lamech, the only woman named in the entire pre-flood line of Cain. One name. In 7 generations, the Ethiopian tradition kept her name, and the reason behind it, and what it means that her name was preserved when so many others were not. But we begin where the line begins, with Cain walking east of Eden, into a land the text calls Nod, and the first thing he did when he arrived was build. Genesis chapter 4, verse 17, one sentence. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. One sentence. For the first city ever built by human hands. No description of its walls, no record of how long it took. No account of who helped him build it, or what materials he used, or what it looked like standing on the plain east of Eden in a land that had never held a human structure before. Genesis gives us the fact and then moves on. But the Book of Jubilees does not move on. Jubilees slows down here. It holds this moment because in the Ge'ez tradition, the act of building a city is not a neutral act. It is a theological statement, a declaration made in stone and timber about what a person believes the future holds. You do not build a city if you believe the world is ending. You do not build a city if you believe you are temporary. You build a city when you have decided that you and the people who come from you are going to be here for a long time. Cain had been told that the ground would not yield to him, that he would be a wanderer, that the mark on him was not permission, but protection. And then he stopped wandering and built. I have sat with that tension longer than I expected to. A man under judgment, choosing permanence anyway, not in defiance of the judgment, but perhaps in spite of it, the way people sometimes build, not because they are free, but because building is the only response they have left to the weight of what they are carrying. Now, the Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for what Cain did when he named the city after his son. The word is Säyyämä. Säyyämä. Say it quietly if you want. Säyyämä. In Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has spoken without interruption in its stone churches, in its highland monasteries, in the island sanctuaries of Lake Tänä for 15 centuries. Säyyämä does not simply mean to name something. It carries the weight of a consecration, of setting something apart by attaching your name to it or the name of someone you love, so that the place and the name become inseparable. In the Ethiopian liturgical tradition, Säyyämä is the word used when a church is dedicated, when the tabot is placed in the innermost chamber, and the building is declared no longer ordinary, no longer just stone and timber, but a place that now carries the identity of what was placed inside it. That is the word the Ge'ez tradition applies to what Cain did when he named the city after Enoch. He did not simply label a settlement. He consecrated it to his son's future. He said, with the act of naming, this place belongs to you. Whatever I have done, whatever mark I carry, whatever ground will not yield to me, this city is yours. I have sat with that line a long time because it is not the act of a man who has given up. It is the act of a man trying to give his son something he himself was never given, a place to belong to. Now, the Book of Jubilees gives us something else about this city that Genesis does not. It records not just that Cain built it, but what building it cost him. Jubilees chapter 4, in the Ge'ez text, preserved in the Ethiopian canon, in manuscripts held today, in the collections of the Tewahedo Church, some copied as early as the 14th century, from exemplars reaching back to the Aksumite Empire Dara records, that Cain built this city in the years after Abel's blood had cried out from the ground, not before, after, which means the city was built in the full weight of what Cain had done, not in innocence, not before the knowledge of it, after. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this passage understood the significance of that timing, because in the Ge'ez tradition, building after judgment is not the same as building before it. Building before judgment is ambition. Building after judgment is something harder to name, closer to the need to make something that outlasts the worst thing you have done. The city was Cain's answer to what the ground said to him every time he pressed his hands into it, and it gave him nothing back. He could not farm, so he built. The name of the city in the Hebrew text is Chanoch. In Gez, the Ethiopian tradition renders it as Panok, Hanok, the same root as the name Enoch. And this is where the Ethiopian commentary tradition does something no Western commentary I have found fully addresses. It asks, why this name? Not what does the name mean. Why did Cain choose this particular name for both the city and the son born at the same time? The root of Panok in the Semitic languages means dedicated, or initiated, or trained up, as in something that has been prepared for a specific purpose, handed over to the work it was made for. Cain named his son Dedicated, and built a city and called it Dedicated, and the Ethiopian tradition holds that this doubling was not accidental. It was a declaration, a father saying, in the language of names and stone, that what he was building and who he was raising were the same act, the city and the child dedicated together to a future that Cain himself had been told he would never see clearly. I think about the people who have built things they would never live to see finished, who named what they were building after the child they were raising. Inside the weight of their own failure, Cain is not the figure. Most of us were given permission to feel anything quiet about, but the Ethiopian text does not let him remain only a warning. It lets him be what he also was, a man building after the worst thing. Now, the city of Enoch does not survive the flood. No city of the antediluvian world does. But what was built inside it, what was learned there, what was passed forward through the 6 generations that came after Cain walked its streets, that is not so easily erased, because the next name in this genealogy, the name Cain's son Enoch, passed to his own son, is a name the Ethiopian tradition reads as a specific marker, not a common name, not a name chosen for its beauty, a name chosen because of what had already happened to the ground beneath the city, The name is Irad, and the Ge'ez tradition has something specific to say about what that name was recording. But that is the next generation. And before we get there, the city itself has one more detail that the Ethiopian scribes preserved in on one specific manuscript that no commentary I have found has ever fully addressed. Not a correction, not a translation note, a question written in the same hand as the main text. 4 words about the city of Enoch that the scribe could not move past without stopping to ask. We will return to that note before this night is done. But first, the son, Enoch of Cain's line, and the question that has never been fully answered about why he carries the same name as the most righteous man who ever lived. Before we continue, gentle heart, let me ask you something softly. What name from tonight's text stays with you so far? Cain, Enoch, the city, the act of building after the worst thing. Whatever it is, leave it in the comments. I want to know where this is landing for you tonight. And if these nights, these slow, careful, old text nights, are what your rest has been missing, a quiet subscribe keeps this close. It means the next study finds you the way this one did, without searching, without effort, simply arriving at the hour you need it. Now, back to the line of Cain, back to the son who carried a name that should not exist in this genealogy. There is a problem sitting quietly inside Genesis chapter 4. Most people never notice it. Not because it is hidden, because the genealogies move so fast that the eye passes over it before the mind has time to register what it just saw. The name Enoch appears twice, once in the line of Cain, once in the line of Seth. Cain's son is named Enoch. Seth's great-great-great-grandson is also named Enoch. Same name, different father, different world, different everything. And Genesis offers no explanation for this. It does not say the names are connected. It does not say the names are coincidence. It simply places them both in the same book in 2 separate genealogies and moves on. The Western commentary tradition has generally treated this as coincidence, a common name appearing in 2 different families, nothing more. But the Ethiopian tradition does not read it that way, not even close. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian commentary tradition uses for this kind of deliberate repetition across 2 separate genealogies. The word is Tənbəlat. Tənbəlat. In Ge'ez, Tənbəlat does not mean coincidence. It does not mean similarity. It means a placed echo, a repetition that was put there on purpose to make the reader stop and hold the 2 instances side by side. The Ethiopian scribes who copied the genealogies understood Tənbəlat as one of the text's primary teaching tools. When a name, a phrase, or a number appears in 2 separate contexts in the same sacred record, the tradition does not say, "How interesting," and move on. It says, "Sit here. Something is being shown to you." Hold these two instances together and wait for what they reveal. So the Ethiopian commentary tradition held the two Enochs together, and what it found, when it did, is something that changes how you read both genealogies, not just one of them, both. The Ethiopian reading begins with the name itself, Hanok, dedicated, initiated, trained up for a specific purpose, and the tradition asks, what purpose? In the line of Seth, the answer is clear. Enoch, son of Jared, walked with God for 300 years, was given instruction, was taken without tasting death, and became the first human witness to what exists beyond the ordinary world. His dedication was toward the sacred, but in the line of Cain, the Ethiopian tradition asks, dedicated to what? And the answer it preserved is not what I expected. When I first read it carefully, the tradition does not say dedicated to corruption. It does not say dedicated darkness. It says dedicated to the earth. Enoch of Cain's line in the Ethiopian reading was the first human being specifically dedicated to the project of human civilization, to building, to permanence, to the question of what human beings can make of the world when they are working entirely from their own hands, not from heaven downward, from the earth upward. And the Ethiopian tradition holds that this dedication produced real things, lasting things, things that shaped the world long after the flood erased the city his father built. The Book of Jubilees, in its Giez rendering, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, records something about Enoch of Cain's line that no Western commentary preserved in the same form. It records that Enoch did not only inherit the city, he expanded it. The text uses a specific construction for what Enoch did to the city his father built. Not built, not continued. The Giez construction used here appears in the Ethiopian canon in two other places. Once, in the account of Solomon's expansion of David's preparations for the temple. Once, in the description of how the Aksumite kings developed the city of Aksum from a settlement into a civilization. The construction means to take what was started by a father and press it further than the father's vision had the reach to go. Enoch of Cain's line did not simply live in the city. He grew it into something his father could not have built alone, and the Ethiopian tradition does not read this as rebellion against the judgment on Cain. It reads it as the first inheritance, the first recorded moment in human history when a son took what a father gave him and made it larger. I have sat with that longer than I expected to, because we are so accustomed to reading Cain's line as a descent, generation by generation, darker, further from the source, more dangerous, more lost. But that is not how the Ethiopian text reads it. Not entirely. The Ethiopian text reads Cain's line as a civilization developing, making real things, solving real problems, learning at great cost what human hands are capable of and what they are not. Now, there is something else the Ethiopian tradition preserved about Enoch of Cain's line that I want to give you carefully, because it is the kind of detail that sounds small when you first hear it, and then it opens. The Tənbəlat manuscripts held in the ancient monastery of Debri Chihike Istifanos on the shores of Lake Haik in the highlands of northern Ethiopia, one of the oldest monastic sites in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. Dor preserve a commentary fragment on the genealogy of Genesis 4 that other manuscript traditions do not contain in this form. The fragment addresses the city of Enoch directly, not in theological language, in architectural language. It records a specific detail about the structure of the city's inner chamber, a room at the center of the city that Enoch of Cain's line is said to have built, not for living in, not for storage, not for gathering, for remembering. The fragment describes it as a room built to hold names, the names of those who had lived in the city, written, preserved, in a structure specifically designed to outlast the people whose names it carried. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this fragment understood what they were recording. The first memorial, the first human attempt to say, the names of the people I loved should not disappear, just because they did. And it was built in the line of Cain, in the city dedicated to a son, by a man whose own name meant initiated, trained up for a purpose. The Ethiopian tradition does not resolve the tension between this Enoch and the other one. It holds them as the text holds them, side by side. Two dedications, one toward heaven, one toward the earth, and the Tənbəlat, the placed echo, asking you to hold both and see what they reveal about what dedication means when it goes in opposite directions from the same root. The city would not survive. The room of names would not survive. The flood would take the city of Enoch the way it took everything that had been built from the earth upward, without the anchoring of what comes from above. But the impulse, the specific human impulse, to build a room and fill it with names, so that the people you loved would not simply vanish, that did not drown. It is still here, in every memorial, in every stone carved, with a name that someone refused to let the ground take without a record. Enoch of Cain's line built the first one, in a city named for him by a father who could not make the ground yield, but could make stone stand. And from that city, from that room of names, the line continued to a son whose name the Ethiopian tradition reads as the first honest description of what living in that city had cost. The name is Irad, and the Ge'ez meaning of it is not what most translations have offered. Not even close. That is where we go next. Genesis chapter 4, verse 18. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael. 3 generations, 1 verse. No description, no story, no record of what they built, or what they believed, or what the world looked like in the centuries they occupied. 3 men, each one the son of the previous, each one living in the expanding city that Cain built, and Enoch grew in the land east of Eden. Carmel and Genesis gives them a name each and moves on. The Ethiopian tradition does not move on. The name Irad. In most Western commentaries, this name is passed over with a brief note about uncertain etymology. Some scholars suggest it may relate to a root meaning fleet or swift. Some suggest a connection to the word for a wild donkey. Most simply, leave it unresolved and continue. The Ge'ez tradition does not leave it unresolved. The Ethiopian commentary, preserved in the manuscript collections of the highland monasteries, reads Irad from a Semitic root meaning fugitive of the earth, or the one who flees what the ground holds, not fleet in the sense of speed, fleet in the sense of someone who cannot stay still, someone who moves because staying means facing. What the ground beneath the city is still saying, remember. The ground under the city of Enoch was the same ground that had cried out with Abel's blood, the same earth that had refused to yield to Cain, the same soil that carried the memory of the first death. In every handful dug for a foundation stone, and Cain's grandson is named the one who flees what the ground holds. The Ethiopian tradition reads this not as condemnation. It reads it as honest record keeping. A name that says this is what the 3rd generation of a cursed bloodline feels like from the inside. Not comfortable, not settled, moving, always moving, because the ground is not safe to stand on when you know what is buried in it. I have sat with Irad longer than most people would think to, because I think there are people who understand exactly what it means to carry the weight of what your family did before you arrived, to live in a city built on ground that remembers something you wish it would forget. Irad was not the one who shed the blood. He was the one who grew up in the city built after it, and his name says everything about what that felt like. The second name, Mehujael. This is the name the Ethiopian tradition stops at longest, and for good reason, because Mehujael is the name in this genealogy that functions as a hinge, a turning point embedded in the bloodline itself, visible only if you know what the name means. Most Western translations render Mehujael as smitten of God or struck by God and leave it there. The Ethiopian commentary tradition does not leave it there. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian scribes used when they translated and commented on the name Mehujael in the manuscript tradition of the Tewahedo Church. The word is Käwwänä. Käwwänä is Ge'ez. Käwwänä does not simply mean to be struck. It means to be marked by an encounter that you did not seek and cannot undo. The distinction matters enormously in the Ethiopian theological tradition. Being struck implies punishment, implies wrongdoing that produced a consequence. But Käwwänä implies something different. It describes the condition of a person who has come into contact with something larger than they were prepared for, and carries the mark of it not as punishment, but as evidence. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this name in the Highland scriptoriums understood Mehujael not as a man being condemned by God, but as a man bearing the evidence of living in a bloodline that had already encountered God and turned away from the encounter. The mark was not fresh. It was inherited, carried forward from Cain's encounter at the altar, through Enoch, through Irad, arriving now in Mehujael as a name, as if the genealogy itself was saying this generation still carries the mark of what happened 4 generations ago, not as punishment, as memory. The ground remembers, the name remembers, the bloodline remembers. The Ethiopian tradition reads Mehujael's name as a warning placed inside the genealogy by whoever first recorded it, not a warning to Mehujael, a warning for the reader, saying, look at what is still being carried here. Look at what 4 generations have not been able to put down. Look at the name and understand that some marks do not fade just because time passes. They become names. They become part of how a family identifies itself to the world. Now, the Tənbəlat manuscripts that preserve the commentary fragment on the city of Enoch also preserve something specific about Mehujael that I have not found in any Western commentary. The fragment records that Mehujael was the first person in Cain's line to ask a question, not to build something, not to name something, not to father someone and continue the line, to ask. The question the fragment preserves is not recorded word for word. The Ethiopian scribes did not give us the exact words. They gave us the category of the question, and the category is this: why? Not why in the sense of, why did this happen to me? Why in the sense of, why does the mark not end? Why does the ground still remember? Why does a name have to carry what a man never chose to carry himself? The Ethiopian scribes who recorded this did not answer the question. They preserved it the way they preserved everything they could not resolve, exactly as it was, without simplifying, without replacing the difficult question with an easier one. Mehujael asked why, and the tradition kept the asking, because the asking is itself a kind of turning, not yet all the way towards something better, but no longer entirely turned away. The third name, Methushael, in Hebrew and in the Ge'ez rendering the Ethiopian tradition uses. This name carries a root meaning man of God or the one who belongs to God. Read that again. The 5th generation of Cain's line carries a name that means man of God in the bloodline that began with the first murder, in the city built on ground that remembers blood, in the genealogy that most people read as a descent into darkness, generation by generation, further from the sacred. The fifth generation is named Man of God. The Ethiopian commentary tradition holds this name with particular care because it does not fit the simple reading. It does not fit the narrative of inevitable decline. A name like Methushael in the fifth generation of Cain's line suggests that someone in this family was still reaching, still using the name of God to identify a child, still believing or hoping or needing to believe that the mark was not the whole story. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this name in the monastery collections noted its placement carefully because it sits between Mehujael, the one who asked why the mark remains, and Lamech, the man who would write the most violent poem in the pre-flood world. Between the question and the descent, a name that means man of God. The Ethiopian tradition reads this not as irony, not as the text mocking the bloodline, by giving it a holy name before the worst generation arrives. It reads it as a window, a moment in the genealogy where the line could have gone differently, where someone chose a name that pointed upward, and what happened next was not inevitable. It was chosen. The Ge'ezi's word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for this kind of name, a name that carries within it a direction the person who received it did not follow. The word is Fəlsət, Fəlsət. In Ge'ez, Fəlsət means a departure from the path that was indicated, not a random wandering, not an accidental drift, a departure from something specific, from a direction that was built into the name at the moment of naming. The Ethiopian scribes who used this word in their commentary on Methushael were saying something precise. The name pointed somewhere, and Methushael's son went elsewhere, deliberately, with full knowledge of what the name his father carried had been pointing toward, Fəlsət. The departure from the indicated path, it appears in the Ethiopian canon in one other significant context. In the Book of Jubilees, in the passage describing the Watchers, at the moment they descended to the daughters of men, the same word, the departure from the station they were given, the Ethiopian scribes who placed this word in the commentary on Methushael were drawing a line between the Watchers who left what they were made for, and the son of Methushael who would leave what his father's name had pointed him toward. The son of Methushael is Lamech, and Lamech is the generation where everything the line of Cain had been building toward arrives, not in darkness only, in something more complicated than darkness, in music, in craft, in poetry, in the first recorded human speech that uses the structure of a song to say something that should never have been sung. But before Lamech speaks, he chooses, and the Ethiopian tradition is specific about what he chose and how he chose it, and what the two names he attached himself to on the day he chose reveal about what was already moving through this bloodline by the 6th generation. The names of Lamech's two wives ere the next thing the Ethiopian text opens: Adah and Zillah. And in the Ge'ez tradition, these two names placed side by side are not simply the names of two women. They are the first recorded description of a man trying to hold two opposite things at the same time, and what those two things were, and what it cost him, and what it cost everyone who came from him. Nar, that is where we go next. Genesis chapter 4, verse 19. And Lamech took two wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. One verse. The first recorded polygamy in the history of the world, and Genesis gives us two names and nothing else. No reason, no context, no record of how it happened or what it meant to the people living around it, or what it cost the women whose names were placed in this verse side by side, as if the simple fact of their proximity was explanation enough. The Western commentary tradition has generally treated this verse as the beginning of moral descent. Lamech breaks the pattern established at creation. One man, one woman, and Lamech takes two. End of analysis. Move to the next verse. But the Ethiopian tradition does not move to the next verse. It stays here with the names because in the Ge'ez tradition, names are never decoration. Names are the text's most compressed form of meaning, and these two names, placed side by side in the same verse, in the same man's life, tell a story that the verse itself does not tell. The first name, Adah, in Hebrew, the root of Adah means ornament, or brinkus, or the one who adorns. The Ethiopian Ge'ez rendering holds the same root and adds a specific weight to it that the Hebrew alone does not fully carry. The Ge'ez word the Ethiopian tradition uses when commenting on Adah's name is Burhan. Burhan. In Ge'ez, Burhan means light, but not light in the ordinary sense of illumination. Burhan is the word the Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy uses for the specific quality of light that belongs to the sacred, the light that fills the church at the moment of consecration, the light described in the vision of the throne room, in the Book of Enoch, the light that the Ethiopian scribes understood as the visible presence of something that cannot be fully seen. When the Ethiopian tradition reads Adah's name through the lens of Burhan, it is saying something specific about what Lamech chose her for, not for beauty only, for what she represented, for what her presence in his life allowed him to tell himself about who he was. Adah was the light. Lamech kept near him to soften what he knew about himself in the dark. The Ethiopian commentary tradition reads Adah as the part of Lamech's life that still reached toward what Methushael's name had pointed toward. The man of God, reaching through the brightness of a woman, he chose to keep close, not because he had arrived at what the name pointed toward, because he needed something near him that still pointed. I have sat with that a long time. The way people sometimes choose to keep certain things near them, not because they have become those things, but because they are not ready to let go of the direction those things represent. Adah was Lamech's, his light kept close in a life that was moving steadily toward something else. The second name, Zillah. In Hebrew, the root of Zillah means shadow or shade, or the one who gives cover. The Ge'ez word the Ethiopian tradition uses when commenting on Zillah's name is Tzelal. Tzelal. In Ge'ez, Tzelal carries the meaning of shadow, but with a specific weight the English word does not fully hold. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, Tzelal is not darkness. It is not the absence of light. It is the consequence of light. You cannot have Tzelal without Burhan. You cannot have shadow without the light that makes it. And the shadow in the Ethiopian theological understanding is not something to be feared. It is something to be understood as the necessary companion of every brightness. The Ethiopian scribes who commented on these two names, placed side by side in the same verse, in the same man's life, saw the pairing immediately. Burhan and Tzelal, light and shadow, Adah and Zillah. And what the tradition says about why Lamech chose both is one of the most quietly devastating readings in the Ethiopian commentary on Genesis. It says, Lamech did not choose light and then choose shadow separately. He chose both at the same time because he understood, even then, that he was a man who could not survive on only one of them. He needed the brightness of Adah to face the day. He needed the cover of Zillah to survive the night. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for this specific condition of a person who holds two irreconcilable things, not from confusion, but from the deliberate knowledge that neither one alone is enough. The word is Mekəfəl. Məkəfəl. In Ge'ez, Mekəfəl means a division within, not a split, not a fracture, a division that the person themselves has chosen to maintain because collapsing it would require them to become something they are not yet willing to be. The Ethiopian scribes used Mekəfəl in their commentary on Lamech to describe a man who had not broken, who had instead organized himself around the division, built a life. On two sides of a line, he drew himself and refused to erase. Adah on one side, Zillah on the other. Light facing him in the morning, shadow covering him at night, and Lamech moving between them each day as if the moving itself was a kind of answer to the question his father Methushael's name had been asking since before Lamech was born. the question of which direction the man of God's son would go. The Ethiopian tradition says Lamech's answer was both, and the tradition holds that both was not strength. It was the shape of a man who had not yet chosen, who was keeping his options open at the cost of everything the people closest to him would pay. Now, the Ethiopian Synaxarium, the great liturgical calendar of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which records not only saints and commemorations, but specific theological observations on the figures of the sacred record, preserves something about Adah and Zillah that no other surviving commentary contains in this form. It records that both women understood what they were part of, not as passive figures, not as women who were chosen and had no voice in the choosing. The Synaxarium presents both Adah and Zillah as women who made their own assessments of Lamech, who stayed not because they had no other option, but because each of them saw something in him that the other could not see from her side of the division. Adah saw the light he carried and believed it was stronger than what she could not yet see. Zillah saw the shadow and understood it in a way that Adah, standing in the brightness, could not fully reach. Two women, one man, each one holding a partial truth about him that the other did not have access to. And Lamech, the man who needed both to see himself whole, never giving either of them the full picture. The Ethiopian tradition does not celebrate this arrangement, but it does not flatten it either. It holds the complexity the way it holds everything. It cannot fully resolve. With care, with the specific attention of a tradition that understands that the people in these genealogies were not symbols. They were human, complicated, making choices with the full weight of what those choices cost. Now, there is one more detail about Adah and Zillah that the Ethiopian tradition preserved, and I want to give it to you carefully because it connects to something we will return to when we reach the 7th generation. The Cairo Geniza, the vast collection of manuscript fragments discovered in the storeroom of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat, Old Cairo, in 1896, contains a fragment that Ethiopian Orthodox scholars have cross-referenced with their own commentary tradition on the names Adah and Zillah. The fragment in the Cairo Geniza collection preserves a question about these two women that the Ethiopian tradition had been asking independently for centuries. The question is this: why were their names preserved when the names of almost every other woman in the pre-flood world were not? Think about that. Genesis chapter 4 names two women in the line of Cain, Adah and Zillah, and one more whom we have not yet reached. 3 named women in the entire pre-flood record, outside of Eve, all 3 in the line of Cain. The Ethiopian tradition and the Cairo Geniza fragment both ask the same question: why here? Why in this bloodline, of all the bloodlines in the antediluvian world, did the record choose to preserve women's names? The Ethiopian commentary tradition's answer is not what I expected. When I first read it, it says, the names were preserved because the women outlasted what the men built. The city of Enoch did not survive the flood. The room of names did not survive the flood. Lamech's choices did not survive the flood. But the names Adah and Zillah, and the name of the third woman, the one we have not yet reached, those survived, because someone chose to write them down, and keep writing them down until they arrived here, in this account, in this night, in whoever is still holding this hour. The Ethiopian tradition holds that the preservation of these names was not accidental, that the names of these women were the thread the record chose to carry through the line of Cain, when everything else that line produced went under the water, and the most important name of the three, the one the tradition holds longest, the one whose meaning in the Ge'ez stopped me completely when I first read it slowly, is the one we have not yet opened. The only named daughter in the entire pre-flood world. The seventh generation's one preserved woman. But before we get there, we pass through the three children Adah and Zillah gave Lamech, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. 3 children, 3 gifts to the human world that outlasted everything. The flood erased, and the Ethiopian Bible preserved a specific detail about one of them that Genesis never mentioned. A detail about Tubal-Cain and what he made, beyond what the text tells you he made, that the tradition kept because it understood that what he made was still in the world, still being used by hands that did not know whose hands first shaped it. I want to step out of the text just for a moment, not away from it, just to the edge of it, where I can speak to you a little more directly. There is something in what we have been reading tonight that I have not been able to move past quickly. The names that were preserved when everything else went under. Adah, Zillah, women whose names survived a flood that erased cities. And I keep thinking about the people who carry names or histories or inheritances that no one around them recognizes the weight of, who come from something complicated, who were handed a city built on difficult ground and told, "This is yours now, carry it." If that is you tonight, if you are holding something from the people who came before you that feels too heavy to explain and too important to put down, Irad understood that, Mehujael understood that, even Methushael, who chose the name man of God for a son, who would not follow it, understood that. You are not the first person to carry a name heavier than it looks, and tonight you do not have to resolve it. You only have to rest in it, the way the text rests, with every name it could not explain, carefully, without rushing toward an answer That isn't ready yet. Now, back to the children of Lamech. Genesis chapter 4, verses 20 and 21. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. And verse 22, Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. 3 sons, 3 verses, 3 gifts to the human world: the portable home, the instrument of music, the forged tool. And between these 3 gifts and the generation that follows them stands the entire architecture of human civilization as the pre-flood world knew it. Wherever human beings have gathered since, they have gathered in shelters. They have gathered around music. They have gathered around the things their hands have shaped from metal. All 3 trace back, according to Genesis, to 3 brothers, sons of Lamech, grandsons of Methushael, the man of God, great-grandsons of a man who carried the evidence of an encounter with the divine as a name. The Ethiopian tradition does not read these 3 gifts as the inventions of a corrupt line. It reads them as the inventions of a human line, which means neither purely sacred nor purely fallen, but genuinely both. The first son, Jabal, born to Adah, the light, the Burhan. The Ethiopian commentary tradition reads the assignment of Jabal to Adah as deliberate. The son who gave the world the portable home was born to the woman who represented brightness. And the Ethiopian tradition holds that this pairing is the text way of saying something specific about what the portable home means. A home that moves is a home that carries its light with it. It does not depend on the permanence of walls to hold what matters. The city of Enoch was permanent, built from stone, named after a son, dedicated to the future of a bloodline, and it did not survive. But the tent, the portable dwelling, the home that folds and moves and rises again, somewhere new that survived. Because what cannot be destroyed by flood or fire or time is not the stone structure, it is the knowledge of how to build shelter wherever you find yourself. How to make a home out of what the place you are standing in is willing to give you. Jabal gave the world that, born to the light, carrying it forward in a structure that never stayed in one place long enough for the ground beneath it to become a problem. The second son, Jubal, also born to Adah, the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe, the first musician. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for what Jubal gave the world when he gave it music. The word is zamar. Zamar. In Ge'ez, zamar does not simply mean music. It means the ordering of sound. Into meaning. The Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy is built around zamar, the ancient chants developed by Saint Irad, the 6th century Ethiopian composer, who the tradition holds received his musical knowledge from the birds of heaven are called zamar, not performance, not entertainment, the ordering of sound into a form that carries meaning beyond what ordinary speech can hold. The Ethiopian tradition reads Jubal's gift as one of the most significant in the pre-flood world, not because music is pleasant, because music is the form that allows human beings to say things they cannot say in any other way. The grief that has no words, the joy that exceeds language, the longing for something that cannot be named but can be felt in a specific progression of sounds played in a specific order at a specific hour. Jubal gave humanity the ability to feel together what it could not speak together, and the Ethiopian tradition holds that this gift was not corrupted by the line it came from, that when Jubal placed his hands on the first instrument and drew the first sound from it, what moved through the air was real. Whatever the ground beneath his feet still remembered, whatever the mark his bloodline carried, the sound was real, and the world has never stopped making it. The third son, Tubal-Cain, born to Zillah, the shadow, the Tzalal, the forger, of all instruments of bronze and iron. Genesis gives us one description, forger of instruments, and Western commentary has generally read this as the origin of weaponry. The man who gave the world the tools it would use to destroy itself. That reading is not wrong, but it is not the complete reading. Not in the Ethiopian tradition. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for what Tubal-Cain actually made. Not the general category, the specific thing. The word is meseria, meseria. In Ge'ez, meseria means a tool of foundation, not a weapon, not an instrument of war. A tool used to lay the groundwork for something permanent. The Ethiopian commentary tradition, preserved in the Tana-Haik manuscripts and cross-referenced in the collections of the monasteries of Lake Tana, records something about Tubal-Cain that Genesis does not mention. It records that before Tubal-Cain forged weapons, he forged tools for building, specifically tools for cutting stone, the chisel, the drill, the instruments that allow human hands to shape rock into a form the rock would not take on its own. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this detail in the stone churches of Lalibela, in the rock-hewn sanctuaries carved directly from the living highland, understood exactly what they were recording. The tools that made Lalibela possible trace their lineage to Tubal-Cain, the instruments that allowed human beings to descend into rock and find the room waiting inside it. Those instruments came from the line of Cain, from Zillah, the shadow, the cover, the woman who gave cover, to a man who needed it, and her son gave the world the tools to cut into the earth itself and make shelter from what the earth was willing to give. The Ethiopian tradition holds this detail, With the same care it brings to everything, it cannot flatten into simple condemnation. Tubal-Cain also forged weapons. The Ethiopian text does not erase that. It holds both the chisel and the sword, the tool of foundation and the instrument of destruction, both from the same hands, both from the same fire, both given to a world that would use each of them for exactly the purposes its condition made inevitable. I have sat with Tubal-Cain longer than I expected to, because the Ethiopian tradition asks a question about him that most commentaries never think to raise. Did he know what his tools would become? Did the man who forged the first chisel understand that the same hand, the same fire, the same knowledge of how metal yields to heat and takes the shape of what presses against it would produce the thing that ended what his grandfather Methushael's name had been pointing toward? The Ethiopian commentary tradition does not answer that question directly. It preserves it the way it preserves everything it cannot resolve, without rushing, without replacing the honest uncertainty with a cleaner story. Tubal-Cain forged from both sides of what his father carried, the light of Adah in the tools that built, the shadow of Zillah in the tools that cut, and the world received both and has been living with both ever since. Now, there is a detail about Tubal-Cain in the Ethiopian tradition that connects directly to what is coming in the next generation. The Tana Haiku manuscripts record that Tubal-Cain taught his craft to one person before the flood came, not broadly, not to the city, not to the generation around him, to one person, specifically by name. And the name of that person is not in Genesis. It is in the Ethiopian tradition alone, and it is not the name you would expect. It is not a son. It is not a man at all. The Ethiopian tradition records that Tubal-Cain taught his craft to his sister whose name the Ethiopian tradition holds as the most significant name in the entire genealogy of Cain, more significant than Cain himself, more significant than Lamech, more significant than any of the three sons whose gifts we have just walked through, because she is the only one of all of them whose name the Ethiopian tradition reads as a prophecy, not a warning, not a marker, not a description of what was already lost, a prophecy, a name pointing forward toward something that had not yet arrived. That name is Nama, and what her name means in the Ge'ez, and what the Ethiopian tradition preserved about her that every other tradition set aside, is where we go next. Genesis chapter 4, verse 22. One line at the end of the verse after Tubal-Cain has been named, after his craft has been recorded, after the world has received the forger of bronze and iron 6 words. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Nama. 6 words, no description, no story, no record of what she built or what she believed or what the world looked like through her eyes. In the city, her great-great-great-grandfather had built from cursed ground 6 words, and then the genealogy moves on to Lamesh's sword song and the silence after it. But her name survived in a genealogy that gave almost no women any name at all. Her name survived in a record that named only 3 women across the entire pre-flood world. Outside of Eve, her name is one of the 3, and the Ethiopian tradition asks the same question it asked about Adah and Zillah. Why her? Why was this name the one the record chose to carry forward when it could have, just as easily, said nothing at all? The answer the Ethiopian tradition preserved is the one that stopped me completely when I first read it slowly. The name Nama. In Hebrew, the root means pleasant, or beautiful, or the agreeable one. Most Western commentaries take the name at that surface level and move on. A pleasant woman in an unpleasant line. End of observation. But the Ge'ez tradition does not take it at the surface. The Ge'ez word the Ethiopian tradition uses when translating and commenting on Nama's name is not the word for pleasant. It is not the word for beautiful. It is not the word for the agreeable one. The word the Ethiopian scribes used is teru. Teru. In Ge'ez, teru does not mean pleasant. It means that which is genuinely good in a world that has forgotten what goodness looks like. The distinction is not small. Pleasant is a description of how something feels to be near. Teru is a description of what something actually is, regardless of how the world around it has named what is good and what is not. The Ethiopian scribes who copied Nama's name in the highland scriptoriums in the island monasteries of Lake Tana, in the stone churches carved from the living rock of the Lalibela Plateau, Dora understood Teru as a theological designation, not a compliment, a category. Nama was not named pleasant in the sense of easy to be around. She was named genuinely good in the sense of carrying something real inside a line that had drifted far, far from the source of what real goodness looks like. She was the Teru of the line of Cain, the thing that was genuinely good in a genealogy. The world had been reading as the record of what goes wrong when a man walks away from God and builds something from his own hands alone. Now, the Ethiopian commentary tradition goes further than the name, further than Teru, further than any Western commentary I have found was willing to go with a woman who receives 6 words. In the entire Hebrew Bible, the Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for what Nama specifically carried, not her nature, not her name, what she carried. The word is Neshet, Neshet. In Ge'ez, Neshet means a bearer, but not a bearer in the ordinary sense of someone who transports something from one place to another. Neshet, in the Ethiopian theological tradition, describes a specific kind of carrier, one who holds something across a threshold that would otherwise destroy what is being held. The word appears in the Ethiopian canon in 3 other significant contexts. Once, in the Book of Jubilees, in the description of Noah carrying Adam's body from the cave to the ark. Once, in the Kebra Nagast, the Book of the Glory of Kings, in the description of the Queen of Sheba carrying something back from Jerusalem that would change everything that came from her. And once, in the Ethiopian Synaxarium, in the commemoration of Mary as the one who carried what the world could not hold any other way, 3 bearers: Noah, the Queen of Sheba Mary, and in the Ethiopian commentary tradition, a 4th, Nama. The tradition holds that Nama was a Neshet in the same category as these 3, a carrier across a threshold that would otherwise destroy what she held. And what the Ethiopian tradition says she carried is something no Western commentary preserved in this form. The Tana Haik manuscripts, together with the Ethiopian Synaxarium, record a specific account of Nama that I want to give you carefully, because it is the kind of detail that sounds like poetry when you first hear it, and then you sit with it longer and you realize it is not poetry. It is the Ethiopian tradition's most specific theological statement about why a woman from the line of Cain was named in a genealogy that named almost no one. The account is this: Nama, in the years before the flood, learned 2 things from the people around her. From her brother Tubal-Cain, she learned the craft of metal, the shaping of what the earth gives into something that serves human hands. But from someone else, the tradition records, she learned something that Tubal-Cain did not teach. She learned the keeping of seeds, not farming, not the cultivation of crops in the ordinary sense of planting a season and harvesting what it gives. The keeping of seeds as a deliberate act of preservation, the selection and the storing and the carrying forward of the specific seeds that would allow the world on the other side of whatever was coming to grow again. The Ethiopian tradition holds that Nama understood, before almost anyone else in the pre-flood world, that what was coming was not simply a judgment. It was an ending, and that endings require someone to carry the beginning of what comes next. Through the destruction to the other side, she was a Nisat, a bearer across a threshold, and what she bore was not gold, not frankincense, not myrrh, seeds, the specific, patient, carefully selected possibility of a world that had not yet been grown. Now, the Ethiopian tradition does not stop there. It records one more thing about Nama that the other surviving accounts do not contain. It records that Nama was known by name to Noah, not as a stranger, not as a figure from a distant genealogy, whose name appeared in a record he had been given to study, as someone he had reason to know. The Ethiopian Synaxarium, in its commentary on the pre-flood world, preserves a detail about the relationship between the line of Cain and the line of Seth that most traditions have not preserved in this form. It records that the two lines were not as separated as the genealogies suggest, that people from Cain's city and people from Seth's settlements lived in proximity, knew each other, traded with each other, sat near each other at the edge of what they had built, and looked at the same sky and wondered about the same things. And in that proximity, Naamah, the Teru of Cain's line, the genuinely good thing in a genealogy the world had given up on, was known. Her name was known. Her keeping of seeds was known. Her understanding of what was coming was known. And the Ethiopian tradition holds that this knowing was not accidental, that the preservation of Naamah's name in the genealogy of Genesis was the text's way of recording that the line of Cain contributed something to what survived the flood, not through the ark, not through Noah's household, through a woman who carried seeds across the threshold of the worst thing the world had ever experienced. The city of Enoch did not survive. The room of names did not survive. The craft of Tubal-Cain had to be relearned on the other side. But the seeds Naamah carried, according to the Ethiopian tradition, did not have to be relearned. They arrived intact in the hands of the one woman in 7 generations of Cain's line, whose name the record chose to keep. The Ge'ez word I want to give you for what Naamah's preservation means. In the Ethiopian theological tradition is the word the scribes used when they recorded why her name survived when so much else did not. The word is Astavelda. Astavelda. You may remember this word from an earlier account of Noah reburying Adam at Golgotha. It means to restore to origin, to return something to the place it was always going to end up. The Ethiopian tradition uses this word for Naamah's name in a specific way. It says the preservation of her name in the genealogy was an act of Astavelda performed by the record itself. The text restoring to origin what the line of Cain had never fully lost. The genuinely good thing, the Teru, the bearer, the Neshet, who carried seeds across the water that erased everything her bloodline had spent 7 generations building, and what arrived on the other side because she carried it was not wealth, not power, not the memory of the city her ancestor built, or the song her uncle played, or the tools her brother forged. What arrived was the ground's ability to give again, the earth's capacity to yield what human hands plant in it with care. Cain was told the ground would not yield to him, and 7 generations later, his descendant carried the seeds that gave the ground back to the world. I have sat with that longer than I expected to, because it means the judgment on Cain was not the last word on Cain's line. the last word was a woman with seeds in her hands, crossing water that was erasing everything behind her and planting on the other side. Before we leave Nama, I want to give you one more detail, because there is something about her name in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition that I have not yet opened. The Tana-Haik manuscripts preserve a marginal note alongside the commentary on Nama, written in the same hand as the main text, not an annotation added later, written at the same sitting by the same scribe who had just finished copying the account of what Nama carried. The note is not a correction. It is not a translation query. It is a single observation. 4 words in Gez, West Zena Nashur. Inside this is flight. The scribe who copied the account of Nama carrying seeds through the flood stopped and wrote, "Inside this is flight, not the flight of escape, not the flight of fear, the flight of something released from the ground. It was buried in, rising toward what it was, always pointing toward. The seed that survives the flood and finds new ground and presses upward toward the light it has never seen, but has always been growing toward. That flight, inside the name Nama, inside the woman from the line of Cain, who carried the world's next beginning in her hands across the water. The scribe set the reed down after writing those 4 words. The note sits in the margin of that manuscript in the Tana-Haik collection. Still, West Zena Nashur. Inside this is flight. Now, there is one more thing left in the 7th generation of Cain's line. One more voice. The voice of Lamech himself, who opened his mouth. After all of this, after Jabal and Jubal and Tubal-Cain, after Nama, after the gifts and the seeds, and the flight waiting, inside the name of the only woman, the record chose to keep and said something that the Book of Jubilees gives a context for. That Genesis withholds entirely the most violent speech in the pre-flood world, spoken by the man who held Burhan and Salal, light and shadow, side by side, for an entire lifetime without choosing. That is where we go next. And what Jubilees says happened the day before Lamech spoke those words, changes everything about what the speech means. Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. That is the entire speech. 6 lines, the most violent human utterance recorded in the pre-flood world, and Genesis gives no context for it, no explanation of who was killed, no account of what the wounding was, no record of what happened. Before Lamech opened his mouth and said this to the 2 women who had been holding his divided life between them for as long as he had lived, he called them to him by name, Adah, Zillah, light and shadow, and then he told them what he had done. The Book of Jubilees in its Ge'ez rendering, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, gives something Genesis does not. It gives the day before. The Ethiopian tradition holds that what Jubilees records about the context of Lamech's speech is the single most important detail missing from the Western reading of this passage, because without it, Lamech's song sounds like pure boast, pure menace. A man celebrating what he has done, inviting his wives to witness his violence, as though it were an achievement. But the Book of Jubilees does not read it that way, and neither does the Ethiopian tradition. What Jubilees preserves about the day before is this: Lamech had a son with him. Not Jabal, not Jubal, not Tubal-Cain, a younger son, named in the account, and the man Lamech killed had come for the son, not for Lamech, for the child. The Ethiopian tradition reads the entire sword song through this detail, and when you read it through this detail, it does not sound like celebration. It sounds like a father who has just done something he cannot undo, to protect something he could not afford to lose, and who is now standing in front of the two women who have always held the two halves of him, telling them what the holding finally cost. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for Lamech's specific act of calling his wives to him before he spoke. The word is karaba, karaba in Ge'ez. Karaba does not simply mean to summon. It means to draw near what you need to witness you at the moment you are most exposed. The Ethiopian liturgical tradition uses karaba in the specific context of the priest drawing the congregation near before the confession, before the moment when what has been held privately is spoken aloud in the presence of those who need to know it, not to perform, to be witnessed. Lamech performed karaba with Adah and Zillah. He drew them near, not to boast. To be witnessed by the two people who had held every other version of him and not left, the light and the shadow, both called, both needed. For this, the Ethiopian tradition reads, the calling of their names at the opening of the speech as the most human moment in the entire genealogy of Cain, not the building of the city, not the forging of the tools, not the music, not the seeds. This, a man calling the names of the people who knew him best before saying the hardest thing he had ever said. Now, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. The Ethiopian tradition holds that this opening is not theatrical. The Ge'ez construction used in the Ethiopian rendering of this line is the same construction used in the Ethiopian liturgy. At the moment, the deacon calls the congregation to attention before the reading of the sacred text. Hear, listen, two separate commands. In the Ethiopian tradition, hearing and listening are not the same act. Hearing is what the body does when sound reaches it. Listening is what the self does. When it chooses to receive what it is hearing as something that concerns it, Lamech asked for both. He asked Adah and Zillah not just to be present. While he spoke, he asked them to receive what he was saying as something that concerned them, as something that was theirs as much as it was his, because it was the man they had held between them in two halves had just become undivided, not in the way Methushael's name had pointed toward, but undivided in the only way a man who has spent his entire life holding two things at once ever becomes undivided, by a moment that does not give him the luxury of choosing sides. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. The Ge'ez rendering of the word for wounding in this verse is the same word the Ethiopian tradition uses for Mehujael, Käwwänä, marked by an encounter you did not seek and cannot undo. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this passage saw the echo immediately. Tənbəlat, a placed echo. The word for wounding in Lamech's speech is the same root as the name of his ancestor 4 generations back, the one who first asked why the mark does not end. And now Lamech, in the 6th generation, has answered that question, not with words, with an act. The mark ends when the marked one passes the marking forward. That is the Ethiopian tradition's quietest and most devastating reading of this speech. Mehujael asked why the mark remains. Lamech became the answer, not because he chose to, because the Fəlsət, the departure from the indicated path that began with Methushael's name and the road not taken, ran its course to its destination, and the destination was this verse, these 6 lines, spoken to 2 women by firelight in a city built on ground that had been crying out since before Lamech was born. Now, if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Most Western commentaries read this number as escalation. Cain was protected 7-fold. Lamech claims 11 times that protection for himself. A man amplifying the divine promise made to his ancestor into something grotesque. That reading is not wrong, but the Ethiopian tradition holds the number differently. The Ge'ez word I want to give you here is the word the Ethiopian tradition uses for the 77-fold in Lamech's speech. The word is Sabata Sabu, Sabata Sabu, 7 of sevens. In Ge'ez, this construction does not simply mean a large number. In the Ethiopian theological tradition, Sabata Sabu is the construction used for a thing that has reached the outer limit of its own nature, not beyond the limit. At the limit, the point where a thing has become fully what it was always moving toward. The Ethiopian scribes who used this construction in their reading of Lamech's speech were saying something precise. Not that Lamech was claiming unlimited vengeance, but that the line of Cain in this moment, in this speech, had reached the outer limit of what it had been becoming since the day Cain walked east of Eden and began to build. 7 generations, 7 times 7, the complete unfolding of what was set in motion at the beginning. Arrived fully at the voice of Lamech, calling his wives by name in the city his ancestor built from cursed ground. The Ethiopian tradition does not read Sabataba Sabu as a boast. It reads it as a completion, the accounting of 7 generations of a line that built real things, asked real questions, gave the world real gifts, and arrived at the place. All of it was always pointing toward, without the turning that Methushael's name had made available. Now, the Book of Jubilees records one more thing about the aftermath of Lamech's speech, something Genesis does not record at all. It records what Adah and Zillah did after Lamech finished speaking, not what they said, what they did. The Jubilees account in the Ge'ez text, preserved in the Ethiopian canon, uses a single word for what both women did when Lamech's voice went silent. The word is komu. Komu. In Ge'ez, komu means they remained standing, not they left, not they wept, not they turned away. They remained standing. In the presence of everything Lamech had just placed between them and the man they had chosen, they stood. The Ethiopian scribes who copied this word noted its weight carefully, because komu in the Ge'ez tradition is not simply a description of posture. It is the word used in the Ethiopian liturgy for the congregation at the moment. The most difficult part of the sacred text is read aloud. The moment when the honest thing has been said and the only response available is to remain present to it, not to resolve it, not to make it easier, to stand in it with your full weight on the ground beneath you. Adah and Zillah stood, the light and the shadow, Burhan and Salal, both of them in the presence of the man who had needed both to see himself whole, receiving now the whole of him at once. The Ethiopian tradition holds this image as the most human moment in the entire genealogy of Cain, not the building of the city, not the room of names, not the music of Jubal, not the seeds of Nama. This, 2 women standing in the quiet after the hardest thing had been said, remaining, because that is what the people who have held the divided parts of someone they love do when the division finally collapses. They do not leave. They stand and they witness. After the sword song, Genesis goes silent on the line of Cain. No more verses, no more names, no more generations. The line of Seth continues. The flood comes, the world is washed, and the city of Enoch, the room of names, the first memorial, the portable home of Jabal, the music of Jubal, the forged tools of Tubal-Cain, all of it goes under. All of it, except the seeds, except the name, except Nama crossing the water with the world's next beginning in her hands, except the question Mehujael asked, preserved in a name, that the record refused to let the flood take, except Lamech's wives, standing in the quiet after, which is also the only posture available to anyone who has just received the full truth of the person they chose to stand beside. 7 generations, 7 names, and what survives them is not the monument, not the weapon, not the weapon, not the song, or the tool, or the city, or the poem of vengeance spoken by firelight to 2 women who remained standing when it was done. What survives is the seed, the teru, the genuinely good thing in a line the world had written off before it finished, becoming what it was. West Zana Nashur. Inside this is flight. Inside the line of Cain was something the flood could not erase, and the Ethiopian Bible kept it when almost every other tradition decided that 7 generations of cursed ground deserved 8 verses and silence. The text has now spoken everything it came to say tonight. Gentle heart, 7 names, 7 generations. Every clue Genesis left unexplained, opened slowly, one by one. Let it settle now, not into argument, not into more questions, into the bones, into the breath, into the slow, faithful, unhurried dark that has been gathering in the room around you since long before this account began. From this moment, only the voice, only the quiet, only the garden that has been waiting for you since before you lay down tonight. The ancient text has spoken. Now, silence completes it. Let the 7 names rest now, not in your mind, in you, deeper than the mind, in the place where things settle when you stop turning them over. Cain building after the worst thing, Enoch dedicating a city to the son he wanted to give a future to, Irad carrying the weight of a ground he did not wound, Mehujael asking why the mark does not end, Methushael naming a child toward something he could not make him become, Lamech calling the names of the women who held him before saying the hardest thing, and Naamah crossing the water with seeds in her hands and flight inside her name. 7 generations, all of it held in the Ethiopian Bible for 15 centuries, waiting for tonight. You do not need to carry any of it further tonight. It has arrived where it was going, into whoever stayed long enough to receive it, into you. The study is done, gentle heart. The text has given everything it came to give, and now we move from the mind into the body, from the word into the rest. The word word was always pointing toward. There is a garden. It has been waiting since before you lay down tonight. Come, there is a garden. You do not need to find it. It has already found you. It was here before this account began, before the first name of Cain's line was spoken tonight, before the first word of the Ethiopian text reached you. The garden was already here, waiting, the way gardens wait that have been tended for a very long time. not with urgency, not with the need to announce themselves, simply present, growing in the quiet of their own deep knowing that the right hour will come. There is a wall, old stone, not the stone of a fortress, not the stone of a city built to keep things out. The stone of a garden wall, which is a different thing entirely. A garden wall is not built to defend. It is built to hold, to keep the warmth of the day inside after the sun has moved on, to give the growing things a boundary, not as restriction, but as shelter, as the specific shape of a space that knows what it is for. The stone of this wall is warm, not from a fire nearby, from the sun that pressed against it all day long and left its warmth inside the stone. The way stone holds everything, it receives, slowly, completely, without rushing, either the receiving or the releasing. Press your hand against it if you want, or simply feel it from where you are. The warmth of stone that has been holding the sun since morning, still holding it now for you. At this hour, the ground inside the garden is soft, not wet, soft in the way of ground that has been cared for season after season by hands that understood that the earth gives more when it is given to in return. Turned over, fed, rested. The ground here has been rested. You can feel it in the specific softness of earth that is not being asked to produce anything right now, that has been given this hour simply to be what it is. Ground, receiving. Think of Nama pressing seeds into ground like this on the other side of the water. Her hands knowing exactly how deep, how gently, how much trust it takes to place something you are carrying into the dark of the earth and believe it will rise. The ground here has that quality, the quality of a place that has received things and held them and given them back in a form more alive than when they arrived. You are in that ground now, not metaphorically, in the way that certain places become present when you have grown still enough to notice them. The garden has found you, and the ground is receiving you the way it receives everything placed in it, with care, without condition, without asking what you are worth, or what you have done, or what mark you carry from the people who came before you. You are here. The ground receives you. That is enough. The evening birds are here. You can hear them before you see them. Not the birds of midday, not the loud assertive calling of creatures competing for the attention of a world still in motion. The evening birds, the ones that sing at the edge of the day when the light is going and the air is changing, and something in the bird knows that this specific quality of dusk requires a specific quality of sound, not urgent, not performed. The sound of a small creature saying, I am here at this hour, in this place, and the hour is good, and the place is good, and I am saying so, because something in me needs to say so before the dark comes and says it differently. The sound moves through the garden, slowly, from one corner to another, bird to bird, each one taking up the thread the previous one left and carrying it a little further into the evening. A transmission, the way all transmissions in the Ethiopian tradition move from mouth to ear, from generation to generation, from the one who received it to the one who will carry it next. The birds are carrying something through this garden at this hour. You do not need to know what it is. You only need to receive it. The way the ground receives the seed, the way stone receives the warmth of the sun, letting it arrive without reaching for it, without trying to hold it, past the moment it was given for. There are plants here, along the base of the wall, growing toward the warm stone, not because they were trained to, but because the warmth is there. And growing things move toward warmth the way breath moves toward air, without deciding to, simply following the nature they were given. Some of them are flowering, not dramatically, small flowers, the kind that do not ask to be noticed, that open at this specific hour, in this specific light, for reasons that have nothing to do with whether anyone is watching. They open because the hour is right, because the temperature and the light and the specific quality of late evening air have aligned in exactly the way they were made to respond to. And they respond quietly, without announcement. The way the genuinely good things in this world always open. Not when they are asked to, when the conditions are finally right. The teru, the genuinely good thing, still opening in this garden, at this hour, in whoever is still enough to notice it. The light is going now, not quickly, the way light goes in a walled garden at the end of a long day, slowly, by degrees. The shadows lengthening from the base of the wall, across the soft ground, toward the center of the garden, where you are. Not the shadow of threat, not the tzalal that covers what it cannot face. The shadow of evening, which is the shadow of a day that is finished with its work, that has given everything it came to give, and is now releasing the garden into the keeping of the night. The night is not empty here. The stars above this garden are beginning to appear, one, then another, then more than you can count if you tried, but you are not trying. You are not counting anything tonight. The stars are simply there, moving in the pattern they were given, keeping what they were assigned to keep. Above this garden, above the warm stone wall, above the soft ground and the small flowers, opening without announcement, and the evening birds passing their thread from one to another in the last of the light. Above you, whether you can see them or not, they are there, keeping. The warmth of the wall is reaching you now. You do not need to be close to it. Warm stone in an enclosed garden at evening radiates. It gives what it received all day long, outward, into the air, into the ground, into whoever is near enough to receive it. You are near enough. Feel it, moving toward you, unhurried. The warmth of something that has been holding all day for this, for the hour when the one who needed it finally arrived and stopped moving and became still enough for the warmth to find them. It finds you now, in the shoulders, the specific places, in the shoulders, where the day left what it always leaves, in people who carry things carefully. The warmth finds those places, not forcing, not demanding release, simply present in the way. Warmth is always present to the places in the body that have been holding cold longer than they needed to. And in the presence of warmth that does not ask anything, the holding begins to soften slowly. The shoulders, the hands that carried everything they carried today. The warmth moving into the hands now, into the places between the fingers where tension settles without being invited and stays without being asked, softening. The way a hand softens when it has finally been given permission to set down what it was holding. You are not holding anything tonight. Not the 7 names, not the questions they opened, not the weight of what Lamech said, or the mark Mehujael carried, or the city built on cursed ground, or the seeds pressed into earth by hands that understood what the ground could hold. None of it, all of it, has been set down at the gate of this garden. All of it resting there, while you are here, inside the wall, inside the warmth, inside the specific stillness of an enclosed space that knows what it is for. The evening birds are quieter now, the last ones finishing their thread, passing it one more time, gently, the way the last light passes from the sky to the stone wall, to the air, to you. A transmission arriving at its destination. You are the destination tonight. Everything the Ethiopian text kept for 15 centuries in the stone rooms of the highland monasteries, in the island sanctuaries of Lake Tana, in the hands of the Taklay scribes who pressed reed to vellum over names they could not fully explain, and kept them anyway, or all of it, traveled here, to this garden, to this hour, to you, and it has arrived, intact, the way seeds arrive at new ground, the way warmth arrives at cold stone after a long night, the way names arrive in the mouths of people who were born long after the ones who first spoke them stopped speaking, arrived in you. The ground is holding you now, not the ground of Cain's city, not the ground that cried out with what it had received. This ground, the ground of the garden, soft, rested, asking nothing, receiving everything placed in it with care. You were placed here with care by the hour that brought you to this account, by the text that traveled 15 centuries to reach you by the names that refused to go under the water without a record, by Nama, who crossed the flood with seeds in her hands, so that the ground on the other side would be ready when someone arrived who needed to rest in it. You are on the other side now. The flood is behind you. The water has receded. The ground is soft. The wall is warm. The birds have said what they came to say. The stars are keeping what they were given to keep. And you, gentle heart, are held. Not because you earned it. Not because you understood every name tonight. Not because the mark you carry from the people who came before you has been resolved simply because you arrived, and the garden receives everything that arrives. The breath is finding its own level now, slower than the breath you take when the world is still asking things of you. Deeper. The breath of a body that has been given permission to do what it was made to do at this hour. Let it go all the way down into the low places, into the places the body keeps what it does not show the world. The tiredness that has been building not just today, but across the long weeks of being a person who carries things carefully. The breath knows about it and moves through it. This voice has been speaking for thousands of years. Not this voice specifically, not these words, in this form, at this hour, but the voice behind this voice, the one that moved through the Tekle scribes in the stone rooms of the highland monasteries, through the priests chanting before sunrise in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, through the hands that pressed reed to vellum over names they could not fully explain and kept them anyway. That voice has been speaking since before the city of Enoch was built, since before Mehujael asked his question into the air above the cursed ground, since before Nama pressed her first seed into earth on the other side of the water. It has been speaking across caves and monasteries and island sanctuaries and sleepless nights, exactly like this one, across 7 generations of a line the world called lost, across 15 centuries of careful keeping in a tradition that looked at what others were setting aside and said, no, not this, this stays. Across the flood that erased the city, across the councils that decided what you were allowed to receive, across every night between the first scribe who copied these names onto the first vellum in the first stone room at the first highland altitude, and tonight, this night, this garden, this warmth in the wall, this soft ground, this breath moving slowly through a body that has finally been given permission to rest. The voice traveled all of that distance to reach you or here, not approximately here, here, in this room, at this hour, in whoever stayed long enough to receive what was kept on their behalf. You stayed, and it reached you intact. the way seeds arrive at new ground intact, the way warmth arrives in stone that has been waiting all day for the evening to let it give what it received. West Zana Nisher. Inside this is flight, inside the 7 names of Cain's forgotten line, inside the city built on cursed ground, inside the question that was never answered, only preserved, inside the seeds, carried across water by the only woman the record chose to name. Dory inside all of it was flight, and tonight, gentle heart, inside you is the same. The ancient voice is finished speaking for tonight, not because there is nothing more. There is always more. The Ethiopian canon has 81 books. The tradition that kept them has 15 centuries of careful nights still to open. But this night has received what it came for, and the voice that traveled from the first scribe to this hour sets the reed down now, not permanently, for tonight the lamp is low. The manuscript is closed. The garden wall is holding its warmth in the dark. The stars above the highland are keeping what they were assigned, and you, gentle heart Dara, are held by the names, by the keeping, by the voice that refused to let 7 generations of a cursed bloodline disappear without a record, by the ground that received the seeds and gave them back as life, by the wall, warm in the dark around the garden that found you at the exact hour you needed finding. May you wake tomorrow lighter than you lay down. May the names you carry from the people who came before you rest tonight the way the text rests in the closed manuscript, in the dark, in the stone room, in the highland that has been holding it for 1,000 years of nights, exactly like this one, still held intact. The ancient voice has been speaking for thousands of years, across caves and monasteries and sleepless nights and 7 generations of names the world forgot to ask about. Tonight, it reached you. That is enough. That has always been enough. Let rest now.